Hi all, in this video we are going to cover what is Spring Boot and what is the difference between Spring and Spring Boot and how many ways we can develop our Spring Boot projects. So a Spring Boot is nothing but it is not any other module of a Spring framework. It is just another approach for developing our Spring applications. It internally uses the Spring framework only. Okay. So Spring Boot starter, there is the advanced dependency, which we can say that there is the advanced dependency. Let me write down here. So Spring Boot starter and advanced dependency, that is the jar files, which provides the libraries to required for the Spring Boot project and helps us to perform auto configuration activities for Spring Boot project. These starters, I was saying that starters. These starters these starters should be added to the class path. It could be either through this pom.xml file if you are using Maven as dependency build tool. If you are using Maven as build tool, so you need to add through pom.xml. And if you are using Gradle as a build tool, so you need to write in build.gradle file. And there is the multiple starter. Basically, starter pattern in Spring Boot looks like Spring hyphen boot starter hyphen start. These stars, these start denotes that there is a lots of starter we can add through this dependency. For example, if you want to work with JDBC, any database connectivity, so you will need to add your starter as Spring Boot starter JDBC. And for example, if we are going to use web application for our project, so we need to add Spring Boot starter web as a dependency. And if we are going to use, for example, if I am going to use DevTools, so we need to add Spring Boot starter DevTools as a dependency. For example, if I am going to use any JPA implementation JPA implementations. So for that scenario, I need to add Spring Boot starter data JPA. For example, I'm going to use Hibernate or any other JPA implementations. So for that, we can use this starter, and there is a lots of etc. There is a lot of internal dependency which will be used through the auto configuration mechanism. If you are going to provide any dependency in this starter, it could be through Maven, it could be through Gradle. So if you are working with Gradle, we need to put this configuration details in the build.gradle file. And if you are working with the Maven, we need to provide it into this form.xml file. So we are coming to this one, like there is a multiple dependency in between the APIs or libraries or jar file, whatever there. So if one class is dependent for the other class, if one class is dependent for the other class, and if you are going, for example, there is the one jar, a dot jar is there. It depends on b dot jar. Okay. So we need to implement both the jar. We need to add within our applications. So the a dot jar file will become a parent jar file. That means it will be starter not just it is the main jar file, but b.jar file will become a dependent jar file. That means it will be related to certain task completions, which A will be dependent on B. That means it will be internally using the B jar file class path and all the Maven plugin and all details through this b.jar file. So coming to this slide, let me go through the slide. So there is some sort of features. Whatever the features is there, I need to go through this official website. So what is the Spring Boot? What that means is Spring Boot actually. Spring Boot makes it easy to create a standalone production grade Spring based application that you can just run. Simply, you can just run these applications. We take an oriented view of the Spring platform and the third party library, so you can get started with the minimum first most of the Spring Boot application and minimal Spring configuration. Means there is no configurations. You can go through my the earlier videos. So for that video, you can go through that advantages and disadvantages of Spring Boot applications. I have already created one playlist and you can go through that. What are the features for the Spring Boot applications? This is the standalone Spring applications. It has the embedded directly, it is embedded servers. There is the lots of server, but it has been given the Tomcat, JT, and Undertow directly. There is the embedded server. So no needs to worry about the WAR file deployment procedure. If you are working with the web applications, you need to create a WAR file and you need to deploy on the servers. This burden has been removed. Provide the opinionated starter dependency to simply build your configuration file. Automatically configure Spring and third-party libraries whenever it is possible. Provide the production-ready features such as metrics, health checks, and externalize configuration. This is nothing but actuators. I have created the advantages for this one as well. Absolutely no need to code generation and no requirement for configuration file, XML configuration file basically. So if you are looking through the architecture of the Spring Boot project, there is no any configuration, XML configuration file. There is the one form.xml file which is not related to the Spring Boot project, which is related to our Maven build tool, where we are configuring our all the dependency and all. Okay. So now coming to this one, this is the feature which I have already gone through it. So what is the differences between Spring and Spring Boot application? So Spring is an open source lightweight framework widely used for developing the enterprise applications, Java enterprise applications. But Spring Boot framework is built on top of the Spring framework only. It is used widely for developing our RESTful web application, RESTful microservices, RESTful APIs. The most important feature of Spring framework is dependency injections. You can go through the dependency injection on the latter part of my video. I will create one video on the dependency injection and Spring framework particularly. You can go through that. The most important feature of the Spring Boot is auto configuration. We do not need to configure any manual part of the any part of the configuration. It has been automatically configured through this Spring Boot application. It helps to create loosely coupled applications. It helps to create standalone application. There is a lot of boilerplate written in the Spring framework applications. What is the boilerplate code? Duplicacy code. Like whatever the code we are going to write, it will be written by multiple times. So that code has been replaced here in this Spring Boot application. So it has been reduces boilerplate code. The test of the Spring project, we need to set up the server explicitly. Like we need to create our server and then we need to configure that into our Spring framework applications. But in case of Spring Boot, there is the embedded server features like JT, Tomcat, Undertow. There is the multiple. There is the this three embedded server has been given through this Spring Boot application, so we can just use these embedded servers. It does not provide any support for in-memory database. There is no any concept for the database. We need to manually create our database. We need to link that to our Spring applications. Then we can work through. But here Spring Boot offers in-memory database, like embedded database, we can say that as a S2 database. So we can just test our unit test cases, or simply we can use POC applications to check with the S2 database. Developers manually define dependencies for the Spring project in form.xml file. Here, Spring Boot comes with the concept of a starter in form.xml file that internally takes care of downloading all the dependencies jars based on the Spring Boot requirement. Here, we do not need to work for the jar configuration and jar compatibility in the Spring Boot application. In case of a Spring, we need to much bother about the dependency of the jars. For example, if you are using Hibernate, which Spring framework is dependent or compatible with which version of Hibernate application, that has to be taken care by the developer. But in case of Spring Boot, we do not need to much bother about it. We just need to write our starter. It will internally take care for importing the dependent and compatible version of the jars. And now coming to the different approaches for developing Spring Boot projects, there is a lots of ways we can develop our Spring Boot application. The first is using the Spring IO initializer tool. So I have already created one video. You can go through that. So simply, if you are going through this one, so Spring IO initializer. So there is the website Spring people has provided us. So that website, through this one, you can just simply create your Spring Boot applications. The second one is using the Eclipse or any other IDEs using the sample Maven application. And the third is using the Spring Tools tool. So STS tools you can use to develop your Spring Boot projects. So I will create one more videos on this part, STS tool. And there one more way using CLI, command line interface. Using the command line interface, you can also create a Spring Boot project. Command line interface. I will create one short video. How can we create the Spring Boot project using command line interface? You can just go through that. Fine. Yep. Thank you. Thank you so much.